I just wanted to talk about in this video just some more reasons why I do not call myself an evangelical and why I'm a Bible believer instead. Right, so I mentioned some things in my previous video that I did just regarding that, and I mentioned that evangelical churches do not use the King James Bible. They do not believe the King James Bible, right? And I just mentioned like some of the worldly standards that they have. But another thing, right, what you'll find with evangelical churches which are evangelical, or even you will find this even amongst churches which are supposed to be like King James Bible believing churches, but which are like sliding to the left, which are moving more towards mainstream evangelicalism. If they historically have not been that, let's say they've been like an independent Baptist church, a church which would have been considered fundamental, and now they're sliding to the left, they're sliding towards evangelicalism. What you will find is you will find worldly church growth methods being used and being employed by the pastor of that church. And this is something I've noticed just with churches that I follow online, and churches and ministries which are here on YouTube, which used to be Bible-believing churches, or would have been considered Bible-believing churches and ministries. And if you look at them now, you can clearly see that they are shifting towards the left. They are shifting towards evangelicalism. And what comes with that is the employment of worldly church growth methods. You know, for instance, you will find that churches, right, they'll either like get rid of the pulpit from the church and just have like a piano stand, or if they keep a pulpit, what they'll often do is like add a whole bunch of like multicolored lights into the auditorium of the church, right? Like purple lights in the background. You know, that is a massive warning sign that this church is drifting away from Bible-believing Christianity and into mainstream evangelicalism by the employment of such worldly, seeker-sensitive church growth methods like using multicolored lights. All right? That is completely worldly. And like the philosophy that these pastors have is that, you know, it's just like these mega churches, right? In these mega churches, you have a whole bunch of like purple lights, green lights on the back of the stage. And what they do is they dim the lights for the audience, right? So for the congregation, that's why in these churches, when they have purple lights on screen and at the back where the guy is preaching, they dim the rest of the lights so that you can't actually bring your Bible to church and read the Bible, because it's literally dark where you are sitting, right? So if you had a Bible in front of you and you were to open up your Bible, it would be dark. It would be very hard to see the passages. It would be very hard to see what is written in your Bible. And they make it like that on purpose because they don't want you to bring your Bible to church. They want you to keep your Bible closed, and they want you to just look at the big screen. And I'm seeing churches here online on YouTube, ministries which I used to have respect for, which were supposedly King James only and still are supposed to be King James only, and yet you see a massive change in those churches employing these multicolored lights on the stage. It's worldly, and it's a clear sign that these churches and these ministries are drifting towards evangelicalism. In fact, they haven't drifted there, they're already there. They're already there, and this is just a reflection of where they are now. So what you'll find, right, is that in many churches, even churches which may have been more fundamental or may have had like a godly Bible-believing pastor, oftentimes when that pastor becomes old and he reaches retirement age, the guy that he hands the church over to is often younger and more liberal, younger and more contemporary, and often wants to change the church, change the ministry to be just a more seeker-sensitive, more contemporary evangelical type church. This is something I'm seeing online with ministries here on YouTube, churches here on YouTube, and it's something I've seen in real life. You know, here in South Africa, we used to have a church several years ago, which was a King James only independent Baptist church that was started by a King James only fundamental Baptist pastor, basically, who came to South Africa as a missionary and planted this church. That church today, and I've been there, that church today is now a 5-point Calvinist church. The pastor there is a follower of John MacArthur, and the church uses the New King James Version. They don't use the King James Bible anymore at that church. And why is that? Because somewhere along the line, that pastor didn't do his due diligence, and he handed the church over to this guy who did not share the same beliefs as him. That's how it most likely happened, or it happened some other way. He handed his church over to someone, and during the course of the handover, it might have gone through several people. But all I know is that that church today is a 5-point Calvinist evangelical church that uses the New King James Version. And that church was started and planted by a King James only independent fundamental Baptist pastor who came here as a missionary to South Africa several years ago. That church, by the way, here in South Africa, I've actually looked up the guy who planted that church, that initial missionary who planted that church. And he had like a outreach here in South Africa to like the Jewish community here in Joburg. Like that was one of the main reasons why that church was planted. That there's certain areas here in Johannesburg which have a lot of, there's like a large Jewish community in certain areas, and they planted their church there. That church, I've looked up the missionary online, and I've seen him preaching on YouTube. I've seen him preaching at a whole bunch of fundamental Baptist churches, King James only churches, and yet the church he planted is not anymore. It's an evangelical church, a Reformed Baptist church now, teaching Calvinism, and using the New King James Version, right? So this is something I'm seeing, and I'm seeing it online as well. I'm seeing it with ministries and guys, and that I have watched some of their stuff, and you can clearly just see the drift that's taking place. Quite frankly, I don't know why they still use the King James Bible. Why are you still using the King James Bible? You have purple lights in your church now. You have multicolored lights in the auditorium of your church. Why don't you just get rid of the King James Bible as well and fully transition your church to become a contemporary evangelical church? That's what I want to know from these people, right? But if you look at the previous pastor who pastored these churches, it was a sound, solid Bible, King James, fundamental Bible-believing man. And now the guy who took over from him is not that. He's clearly something else. He's clearly more liberal, more left-wing, more contemporary. And that's not something that I want anything to do with. You know, so that's just one of the things with that I've noticed. Just like the seeker-sensitive sort of more like contemporary drift that you see in evangelical churches. And like the mentality is we're going to bring people in to give them the gospel. That's like how they justify this worldliness and this apostasy. And that's what it is, by the way. It's apostasy. The reason why it's apostasy is because your church never used to always look like that. You've changed it. You've done something to that ministry. You've moved it to the left. That's apostasy, okay? Apostasy, the word apostasy means falling away from a previously held position. And when you just look at these churches, how they used to be, and now you look at how they are today, it's apostasy that has taken place. And the mentality that these guys have is that we are doing this to bring people in, and we are going to be able to bring more people in and give more people the gospel. That's what every megachurch fraud says. Every megachurch pastor says that. That's their justification. We want a big church so that we can bring in big numbers and get them saved. No, what actually practically ends up happening is you bring in a whole bunch of people, and you bring them in with the purple lights, and you bring them in with worldly methods, and they're not there for sound Bible doctrine. They're there for all this worldly contemporary stuff. And when you stop giving that to them, then they will leave. And the only way you can keep them there is by giving them more of the same. Entertainment is what it is, right? I can't take your church seriously if you have purple lights in the background. Sorry, it looks like a place of entertainment. It doesn't look like a place of true Bible preaching. It doesn't. If you have purple lights in the background, it absolutely undermines your ministry and what you're trying to say, because it's contradictory. If you're trying to preach sound Bible doctrine and you look like, it looks like a children's playhouse or something with all the different lights in the background. So that is just something that I have noticed, and what you find within these evangelical churches, right? And yeah, like I mentioned in my other video, why I'm not an evangelical, it's just a whole bunch of worldliness, worldly low standards. That is just something that you see taking place within these churches. And that's just another reason why I don't want to be associated with this like evangelical worldly movements. I'm a Bible believing Christian. I'm a King James Bible believer, and I'm not one of these worldly evangelicals. I don't believe in that. And I don't want to be associated with that.